On this episode, I'm having a conversation with filmmaker Matthew Thayer, and we talk about Christians and cultural engagement. We talk about how humanity has progressed precisely because of the principles of the kingdom of God filtering into society. We talk about how we need to start playing offense and not only defense, and we need to be salt and light that God called us to be. It's time for Christians to take their place, and we give examples in the film industry and even in the church. We also talk about the objective nature of morality. This is an exciting episode. You're not going to want to miss it, so let's get into it right now.
This is Cutting Edge Faith, the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines and equips you to live out your faith in the cultural chaos of today. God is on the move right now through people just like you. You were created for influence and impact. Let's take your faith to the next level. Learn more at ryanshoward.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ryan S. Howard.
Hello and welcome to Cutting Edge Faith. I'm Ryan Howard, and I've got a very special guest with me today, Matthew Thayer. He is a returning guest, and he is an award-winning filmmaker. He's done work with many of the places you have heard of, and he actually directed the full-length documentary, The Trump I Know, which is the only documentary with an interview with the president, Donald Trump, in the documentary. So I'm so excited to have him back on the show. Matt, thanks for joining.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Nice to be back. I heard our last episode did really well.
Yeah, that's up to over 40,000 downloads now. So we're very excited. Praise God. I mean, It's such an incredible message. And for our listeners, that was back in April of 2022. That's episode 146. It's called Mega Changes in Hollywood and Christian Media. That's an interview with filmmaker Matthew Thayer. So Matt's back, and today we are talking about engaging in culture, and we've got some very exciting things that's going on. But Matt, before we get into that, why don't you just give a little background and kind of just what you're working on today, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah. So since we talked last, we finished up the third full-length documentary that I've directed, called Selection Code, and that one is about Tina Peters, and she's the county clerk in Mesa County, Colorado, and she discovered that her Dominion system was doing some funky stuff, and so she took a forensic image of it before and after an update, discovered that a lot of election files just were mysteriously gone, and started asking some questions and doing some reports, and then got raided by the FBI, as seems to be the, it's in vogue right now.
Yes, hot thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So anyway, we finished that up. That's out. That's actually available. You can go to SperoRumble.com, and Selection Code is there. I'll send you a link, and you can put it in the show notes or whatever for people to be able to watch it. It was paid for by Mike Lindell, and he just put it out there for people to watch because he wanted to get it out there. So you're free to watch it, download it, upload it to somewhere else. Just get it out there because we want people to watch it. It's an encouraging message, about Tina. She's such a strong person. She's just an amazing warrior and for truth. And she doesn't stop. And yet, even though she's been persecuted just over and over and over again for just trying to expose the corruption in the system. So it's a very human story, but at the same time, it's an election integrity movie. A lot of people have said they didn't expect to cry when they watched the movie. Yeah. Cause but that's the, kind of goes into some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, which is, Christians kind of tend to go, Christians, the right, kind of tend to go like facts, figures, like we got to beat people over the head with the spreadsheets and the truth. And that's all that's what truth is, to the right. And, the left, they're much more touchy-feely, and it's about feelings and things like that. And so they have a tendency to just you can keep your facts over there, and that doesn't really move us. But when you can connect people with humanity, and you can connect people, with authentic human emotions, you're not manipulating people. You're just giving them a cathartic experience. And And so when you can do that in conjunction with, the accuracy of the figures and the facts and things like that you can back up, it's really kind of a 1-2 punch. And that's, what we tried to do with that movie. That's what we try to do with all the documentaries that we do. I like to try to find a human element that kind of gives people that story, that feeling that they're watching a movie. And then, so we finished up that, and then we're working on a couple of other documentary projects right now with a few other people. Stuff like I have to be veiled about certain things just because, either A, because of marketing, like you don't want to put stuff out too soon. B, because, the material might be sensitive. And so we can't really tell people, what it is that we're working on just due to the sensitivity of the subject until it's the right time. Or, there's this process, there's just a process of, I haven't been actually hired on the project, but it's been like I'm talking some high level kind of conversations about stuff. And so that, the possibility of working on the project, cause you do a lot of work in this field, a lot of pre-work where it's like, it's always that dance of like, how much work am I going to put into this before I get paid, kind of thing, where it's like you're creating proposals and, as a creative, like, how would you approach this, and so you're like, okay, well, I have to kind of broadly, paint, a picture of what it is that I would do or how I would approach the story, in some sort of unique, creative way, and then kind of pitch that in a sense. So there's some of that going on. We are working on a series right now for Pinnacle Peak, which is connected to Pure Flix. It's going to be an original concept about homeschool families. So it's going to be hopefully a comedy because homeschooling is extraordinarily funny. There's so many people doing it now. And I think that there's going to be it's going to be a heartfelt kind of the Wonder Years kind of style comedy where it's a little bit more of a dramedy. Let's see. I'm also working on another series with Angels. We're for Angel Studios. We're going to be pitching it to them. We've already pitched it to them, but the way that their process works is that we have to create a kind of a concept. So we have to create like at least a 5-minute original piece, kind of a short film in a sense, to pitch the concept. So we're in the process of working on that. We're actually working on 2 projects with that. One's an animated project, and the other one is a live action. So I've been really busy.
Yeah, it sure seems like it.
Yeah.
It's a lot going on. And you're working with some big studios that people have heard of.
There's Universal Studios is interested in one of our films. Their Faith division. We have a script that we've been pitching for a few years. And that's the thing a lot of people don't realize in this business is like how long some of these processes take, especially when you're first starting out. Because, it's all about, kind of connecting with the right people and the right relationships. And then, you're making stuff and kind of proving your mettle. And then, you finally get something going. But we've had this script for, it's been 5 years. But, the funny thing is that, even Steven Spielberg, will have a project that he wants to do for a long time. Like, you remember, did you see the movie, The Adventures of Tintin?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's a cartoon. It's one of those kind of cool cartoons that they did it really well. Like, how they did the Polar Express? Right. It's kind of like that kind of really odd kind of, that one felt a lot more clunky to me, but the Tintin one, they did it. The reason why it works is based off of a series of graphic novels from the 40s and the 50s. So there's kind of a cartoony, and it's kind of a humorous graphic novel. It's adventures of this young reporter, and he's got a little dog, and goes around the world, very kind of Indiana Jones-ish in some ways. And so anyway, but Steven Spielberg fell in love with those those books back right around after Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, because somebody said, "Hey, this is kind of like Tintin," and he's like, "What's Tintin?" And so he sat on that for 30 years. I mean, I think the movie came out 10 years ago. And so like you're talking from the early 80s all the way to, 2014. So it's the process that it takes to develop some of these stories that we know and love and enjoy in an hour or half an hour, or some in these cases of, Netflix series, 10 hours, can take, years and years of development.
Yeah. And I think what's really neat, I mean, in our first interview, we talked a lot about the changes that are happening and how, in the past, Christian media has been more agenda driven, where it's just get the message, gospel very clear, and not so much about the storytelling. And Hollywood has been more storytelling, but now it's kind of flipping, where Hollywood is the agenda driven. And now Christians are waking up like what you're doing, where it's got the storyline and then you've got a B line, which is this, in the gospel or whatever it might be, or values or whatever it is. Yep. And so I think, as we sort of get into talking about engaging in culture, you are on the front lines. And I've been amazed at, on your Rumble channel, how you're talking about how much films and movies have to do with that culture and creation. Could you maybe just talk a little bit about that? And then we'll kind of just get into a few other things about culture and how we can help with that. Yeah.
So on our Rumble channel, every week on Fridays, we've been pretty consistent with this for the last 3 months. There's been a couple of times where we've missed it, but Fridays, we do a show called The Real History of Hollywood. We do it with Mel K. Mel K is a friend of ours. People don't know she is also a podcaster, and she talks a lot about what's going on with like the World Economic Forum and the UN and things like that. But she also was a Hollywood screenwriter and actress, and spent some time in Hollywood before she got out. And she had seen a lot of the grossness, the pedophilia, and things like that. She was exposed to some of that stuff, and so she began to talk about that on her podcast and things like that before YouTube canceled her and she had to go to Rumble. But she's our co-host on that show, and we do talk about we talk about Hollywood films because we love movies. Movies are great. I love movies, and I love stories, and I love the visual arts, and the problem is that and they're powerful. People, they're very powerful. They're powerful tools, and the enemy knows that as well. And so when we go back through and watch some of these movies, especially in retrospect, you go back and watch movies like Contagion, or watch movies like 2012, and you see the climate agenda, and you see Contagion, you see the COVID agenda. It's like you see all this stuff, and you go like, wow, like it's interesting when you can live long enough to see some of those things that were laid out in movies, and they almost seem prophetic in a way, where you're just like, how did they know? Like, especially Contagion. Like, you go back and watch Contagion. Anybody that's watching this right now, it's not the greatest movie in the world from the standpoint of like, oh, this is a beautiful piece of art. And I wasn't never really big on the viruses or the bad guy, and that kind of there's several movies like that, Outbreak and 28 Days and Contagion and things like that. I was just never it's not my bag. I just don't like those movies, and it wasn't because I necessarily had an issue with them. It was just like, I'm just not interested. But when I go back and I watch Contagion for the first time after the pandemic, all of a sudden I'm like, holy crap, like this was have you seen it?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I've seen other clips of things talking about it and showing, and it's just like mind blowing.
They talk about social distancing. They talk about social distancing. They talk about it was 10 feet instead of 6 feet, but it's like, it's crazy. Well, like self-quarantining, all of this stuff.
Yeah. And so that's pretty neat. If anybody's interested in seeing the traces of what came in movies and films, and then what's happening in society and culture, definitely check out Matt's channel. That was SperoRumble.com, I think.
Yeah, Spero Rumble, and then our weekly show, because we have other stuff on there, but you'll find it's The Real History of Hollywood. We also we do have an audio podcast as well. So if people want to listen to it, Of course, we play movie clips and stuff like that. So there's some things that you miss when listening to it on audio. But since you're listening to this on audio, if you want to go and subscribe to us, we're on Spotify and Apple playlists. It's the Spero Pictures podcast. You can find us over there.
And so and like I said, Matt, you're on the cutting edge of, and that's why we have this, you're on the cutting edge faith here. You're on the cutting edge of what's going on in culture, and you've got the beat on what's really happening there. So let's maybe back up a little bit and just talk about cultural engagement just in general. I mean, what comes to mind for you? Like, you hear common reasons people are or are not engaged in culture, or how they engage incorrectly, or how we think we're engaging by wearing skinny jeans and having fog machines and stuff. But I guess just give us a lay of the land there, some thoughts to share there, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, well, okay. So I was just reading a book, and I'm holding it up for those that happen to be seeing this, but it's called Saving Leonardo, and it's by Nancy Pearcey. And Nancy Pearcey also wrote another great book called Love Thy Body, which is, I think it was her most recent book, about 5 years ago, but it's about, just the transgender stuff. And really actually kind of folds over into other, phenomenon, including, the kind of the hookup culture, or, the homosexual, agenda and culture and things like that. But, one of the things that she does brilliantly, and she does also in this book, is she breaks down this this idea of like postmodern and modern culture. And so people that don't understand the two, modernism was back when it's like basically anything that you can't see, touch, feel, taste, anything like that, you can't quantify and experience sensually by the senses, is anything that you can't is not real. So like the only thing that's real is, what you can feel, what you can see. And so that brought about some challenges, back in the, 1700s, 1800s, as far as like, well, what do we do with feelings? What do we do with spirituality? That kind of thing.
Thoughts.
And thoughts, like what's real, what's not real. And so, and then you started coming out of that into kind of the romantic period, and there's, poetry and paintings and novels and plays that all kind of fall underneath of that. And so that kind of began to explore, more of the what we would call kind of folding more into like a postmodernism thought, which is like basically, what I feel is true. And what I see isn't, I'm kind of questioning what I see. And so it's not evenly split by that. And one of the things that she talks about in the Saving Leonardo book, and I haven't read all of it yet. I'm just, kind of gotten into it in the first couple of chapters, but what she's talking about is, that a lot of people actually have this kind of, dualistic, mindset, and especially, and it kind of varies upon generation. And we're starting to see, where it's like, well, this is true and this is factual. And then this aspect of life over here is subjective. So, and so she makes the case that, science and, it's like gravity and the laws of physics and, that kind of stuff, that's facts. Right. And then, over here, it's like morality and religion and things like that. We've been kind of taught to be like, well, that's subjective. That's, kind of your preference that you're depending upon, how you feel. And so what the danger of that is that it's, what we do is now the like moral truths and things like that now become kind of linked to like, well, whatever you happen to believe. Right. So if I, believe in, Islam, or I believe in Judaism, or I believe in Christianity, or I believe in Buddhism, or I believe in atheism, or, whatever, right? It's like, well, my morals are then tied to that. So therefore, my morals are subjective. But yet at the same time, what's interesting is that, to really progress in life, to see progress, now you have to have the underpinnings of Christian morality. And a lot of people don't realize that, because it's like, well, if morals are subjective, then that means that I can go and steal from my neighbor, right? because, well, it's not wrong for me to do it because I don't, but where does that come from? Right. So like you have to, you know what I'm saying? It's like society trusts these underpinnings, and these underpinnings don't just come arbitrarily from nowhere. Right. They are all deeply seated inside of the human heart because we're all created by God. So, so to say that those things are subjective and not fact, is causing a rift, in society, and kind of even this dualism that I think the church experiences. And the church has failed to understand her place. And so, one of the reasons, and Nancy Piercy talks about this in the Love Thy Body book, but one of the reasons why, we've advanced just like, for example, sexually, is because there have been curbs or rails put on male sexuality, because back in Rome, when Christianity, was first birthed, it was no big deal for the man of the house to take his servant boy and rape him just from the standpoint of domination. Like that was it. Like he wasn't gay. He was just dominating his servant, right? Showing him who's boss.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow, well, that's horrible.
Right. Well, it's awful. It's disgusting. But that was normal. That was acceptable human societal behavior. Right. So like we look at that and we think, how barbaric. But we're talking about Rome being the known power in the world. Their culture was the dominant culture. And yet, and this was what the behavior was. So this was normal behavior. This was nothing. Like you could talk about this openly at a dinner party. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And nobody batted an eye.
Yeah.
Right. So now you have Christianity, the Spirit comes, and now, Christianity is now this mustard seed that is starting to sprout and germinate, and grow. Right. And so now all of a sudden you have Paul writing, hey, for a guy to be a pastor, he needs to be the husband of one wife, and starting to put kind of guardrails down on human sexual behavior. Well, that's one of the reasons why Christianity became the fans of Christianity were widows, orphans, women, right? Because it actually empowered all of these marginalized people, these marginalized people groups in society, because it was so heavily patriarchal. It was so heavily male dominated driven. Mm-hmm. And so by putting the guardrails on male sexuality, it actually created this moral structure and this moral fiber that they were holding people to. And well, the dominant culture didn't like that. Right. And so, so that was part of the reason why, they were being persecuted, was because they were actually putting down some standards that didn't exist prior. And people don't like it when you put down standards. Right. And so now what's sad is that you have you have a society that is starting to decay back into, really, they're regressing sexually.
Right. Yeah,
example,
that's right.
Right.
That's the right word. Regressing.
They're regressing. They think they're progressing past this patriarchal Christianity that's putting all of these, standards and normalities and things like that. And you can't do that. And they're actually regressing backwards. And what's sad is that I hear a lot of Christians who are saying like, well, blah, blah, blah. And it's because of this dualistic thing. Well, it's like, well, they can do whatever they want. And I'm not saying that we can't say like, hey, man, if you want to do that, that's your choice.
You think,
we do live in America and you can make those kinds of decisions. But at the same time, we as Christians cannot forget our place in the world as leaven, as salt, as light, and become worthless and then be trampled on. We can't do that. We have to understand that we have standards, and those standards are not necessarily going to always be popular.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think a lot of times we have a lot of Christian leaders today that are more concerned about being popular and their idea of relevant. And relevant is not agreement with culture and society. Nope. Relevant is talking about the things that are on the hearts and minds of people. So if there's a wolf in the flock, the shepherd needs to deal with the wolf. And it doesn't matter if some of the sheep kind of like the wolf. Even if the wolf is a way of thinking or is a belief system or even a way of voting, whatever it is, it needs to be dealt with. And the church has a dereliction of duty, the church leadership, I mean, and it's just, we should be setting the tone, setting the pace, all of these sorts of things, and actually shepherding people and actually shepherding the family and the man, the fathers and mothers and everybody, and actually taking its place, like you said. And so what we've done, what I think COVID, I'm working on an article now about COVID, what it exposed about the church, how it was weak, didn't have that much influence, was willing to just fold and kind of, okay, we don't need to meet, like forget what God said about government and forget what God, what the founding fathers put in the Constitution. Well, the thing is, I think a lot of people just don't even really know what God actually says about government and the fact that there are guardrails. And I did an interview with my wife here last week that was about how, or she was on the show, and we talked about how Paul and Peter and the apostles, or Peter and the apostles, they preached in the name of Christ, and they were told by the government not to do that and thrown in prison. And they didn't do what the government told them. And there's countless other examples throughout the Bible. And so there's that one piece of the church not doing, capital C church, not doing what it should be doing, the body of Christ. And then there's this other piece where like you said, there's a benefit of this Christian belief system, this Christian morality, this truth. I mean, it's not just some arbitrary thing. It's actually the truth that everybody benefits from, that the society grows. And now you look at the destruction of the family and fatherless homes, and like 70, 80, 90%, depending on what statistic you're looking at, of criminals and incarceration and all that sort of stuff, it's all mostly related to a fatherless home or without a father present in the home. So, yeah, I mean, so maybe,
and it's sad too. If I could just jump in real quick, I mean, it's sad too because I had I was just thinking about a project that we've been pitching around for a while. And it's this animation project that we're working on now for Angel Studios. And we pitched it around to some other places. And the problem that we got back from one studio executive, who was a Christian, by the way, said, this is too much about the nuclear family. I wouldn't be able to sell this anywhere because they would want more diverse families represented. And I'm like, that grieved me in that meeting. And I was like, okay, fine. Right. Because it's like, what are you going to do at that point? But I'm not going to sit there and pound something over somebody's head. But what I'm saying, but at that point, to me, that's the type of project that Christian executive producers should be championing out, should be pushing out, should be saying, like, you know what, I'm going to get behind this because this is important, because this is a cultural thing. And if we're going to say that the nuclear family is what's is the mom and a dad, and that's what's normal, and that's the standard, and that's the biblical standard, that's biblical morality, then I should get behind this, and I should do everything that I can to push this forward. You know what I mean? It was just kind of this moment where I was like, wow.
Well, that's the thing where it's like you have the same thing when I ran for office in 2020. You have kind of like these basic things that you and I talk with our families about at the dinner table or on a podcast or whatever. And you go into this campaign and they're like, well, the campaign's different than being in office. You can talk about that after you're in office. Just wait as get elected. It's like, what are we doing here? No, I'm here to talk about what God cares about and what matters. And if I can't talk about that, then I'm not interested in doing this.
Being in office.
And I think that the problem is, and you and I, before we hit record, we were talking about the factor of God showing up and how we need to do what he calls us to do, represent his interests at whatever table we're at, whether in an executive or whatever. and let him set things up with his sovereignty, the way he wants to set it up. And then he does the Red Sea, or then he does the Esther story with Mordecai. And then, and it's just, but if we don't ever take a risk, how, we're not putting ourselves in a position for that. God showed up with Daniel in the lion's den. God showed up with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, all these other examples. And the thing is, like, this executive, well, perhaps God is just waiting for somebody to put this out there and actually represent that at the table. And there's going to be there could be an open door somewhere, but it shouldn't be shut by us. God, we shouldn't shut that door. And so we need to be able to take that risk, put ourselves out there, recognize God's sovereignty in all of that, and then move forward with whatever he puts in front of us.
Well, right. Yeah. Cause it's like, what's interesting, I was just kind of had the imagination. It's like, we don't tee up the ball for God. It's like, we don't set.
That's good. I like that.
He spikes, you know what I mean? And he can spike it, but we got to set it. And so the problem, and that's what amen means. I mean, so be it, let it be done, And so when we don't take those risks, like you were saying, you have these pastors during COVID and everything else, and it's scary. I understand. I mean, anytime that you're faced with, doing the right thing in the face of persecution, it's frightening. I mean, I'm not disregarding that. And I would hope that, the next time that I'm faced with, some sort of, situation where I've got to push through the possibility of being persecuted, or I'm actually persecuted, that I would have the courage to soldier on. You know what I mean? Like, it's a frightening thing. So I'm not downplaying that at all. It's real. But the problem is that when we don't do that, when we don't take that risk, we can't see those Red Sea moments. We don't set the ball for God to spike it. We just fold. And then it's like, well, and then we wonder where God is. And you're just like,
right.
Well, you didn't give him opportunity to show up.
Yeah, that's good. I really like that. And that's just, I was listening to the Benham Brothers podcast the other day, and there was, I'm trying to remember what pastor it was, but they called because they just passed this so-called Respect for Marriage Act in Congress, and they called to get this pastor's opinion on it. Yeah. And the formal response was, we're intentionally ambiguous about that because why? Should be because the Bible doesn't talk about it, or because the Holy, God doesn't have an opinion on that, or no, it's because we would lose half the congregation if he talked about that. Now, that is not a shepherd. That God, there's nothing on earth that God doesn't have an opinion on. You take a piece of paper, write a line down the middle of it, everything on one side that God doesn't care about, and everything that God does care about and have something to say about. One side's empty, the other side is full. Mm-hmm. And it's just, but that's totally missing the point of being in that position. And I think it's also interesting, if you think about the market, if you look at how these kinds of things have performed, like The Chosen and like some of these different actually conservative, I would say maybe not just conservative, but biblically based or biblically themed things, or maybe not even biblically themed, but the principles, there's a market for it. I mean, people want that. And it's just amazing. You saw the guy, what was the, was it a hockey player or whatever that just wouldn't wear the pride jersey? Yep. And he stood up, he gave like a 2-second speech, and his jerseys sold out. Like you couldn't buy his jerseys. And it's just, people want that. So there's a market for it. So it's kind of, there's excuses all over the place why people wouldn't do this, but they're not willing to take a personal risk.
Even to your point, earlier about, pastors, it's like, look at the pastors who stood up during COVID. Their churches are blossoming. I mean, it's exploded. Like the people have exploded. People are looking for strong shepherds that are going to take a stand. Yeah. And are you going to lose some people? Absolutely. But really, honestly, if you're going to, I mean, did you really want to keep them? You know what I mean? Did you really want to keep those types of people? I mean,
that's the thing. I mean, Jesus called the Pharisees out for, they just wanted power. They didn't, it wasn't about God and doing what God wants and representing him and following him and making him known. That's not what it was about. And, Mario Murillo talks about He says, we talk a lot about false prophets, but we don't talk enough about false audiences and how you got 90% or half of this congregation that really doesn't care about the truth. I mean, they may not consciously know that, but really they're getting their fix for the week and feeling good and going about their business. But I will say, though, the church is to blame for some of that as well, because we haven't set the tone. We haven't set the pace. We haven't set that expectation. It's just, hey, come have some more cotton candy and then come back next week and maybe we'll have a pizza party for your kids in the middle of the week. And that way they're, and we've professionalized this thing instead of actually helping men know that they're to be the spiritual leader of their home and helping parents to know that they are the primary spiritual discipler of their families.
Right. Well, I mean, it's like going back to your, shepherd, sheep, wolf. If there's a wolf in the middle of the pack, the way to solve the problem isn't to dress like the wolf.
Right. That's right. Yeah. And then you have not only sheep in wolf in sheep's clothing, but like you say, wolf in a shepherd's clothing.
Well, yeah, or shepherd in a wolf's clothing. You know what I mean? So it's like, you've got to.
I hadn't thought about the reverse of that, but that's what we have. Yeah. I mean, and so it's sad that, that some of these pastors, like you said, have become ambiguous about some of these, these truths. These are truths. These are not like, it's funny because it's like, if Christians actually believed what they actually believe, if they actually lived out what they say they believe, what they say, right? And they say, okay, well, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and Jesus is going to be there up in heaven when I stand before him in glory. And yet, when I'm down here, God's opinion about something is subjective. Well, I don't think you're going to have that conversation with him when you stand in front of him. I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think you're going to be like, oh, I thought you were kind of wishy-washy on that. You know what I mean? Like, and he's going to be like, no. The thing is, people know that in their heart now. It's just a lot of dancing and all this stuff. And if you really, why is that important to you? Why is that important to you? Why is that important? If you do these 7 questions or even 5, it gets to money or self-preservation or whatever it is, instead of trusting the Lord with, I'm just doing what he tells me to do.
Which again, that's the thing, is that you can't just sit here and, and we can't just sit here and throw stones and not pretend that those aren't real things. You know what I mean? Self-preservation, finances, those are very real. They're not
for sure
something that cannot be just discarded as like immaterial and not important. But he did say, don't, seek the kingdom of heaven above all else. He did say that. It wasn't that he was saying that those things, that all else is not important. He was just saying the kingdom is more important.
Right. And I will say that's right. But it also feeds into these things. And that's a part of that. And we need to be representing God's interests, doing things. It's God's will, God's way all the time. That's how he advances his kingdom. Right. So for example, I have a full-time job. I work full-time and I'm making money and paying for my family through that. But so I can say that's why I'm working full time. I mean, yes, I want to be a provider. I'm a provider for my family. That's a part of what God created me to be, a provider. But that's different from me saying, you know what? Yeah, I negotiated that contract and I said I was going to do this, but you know what? Forget that guy. I'm going to lie to this other guy and I'm going to do this other stuff over here. And I'm going to lie to my boss and I'm going to backstab this other guy and all this sort of like, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
That is, I've actually had things in my job where I was, I was a buyer, supplier paying air freight to expedite these parts, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And a manager wanted them to pay for this instead of my company. And we had negotiated a deal and that we would split it 50-50 until a certain thing happened. And somebody wanted to change that. And I literally I could have probably convinced the supplier to do it, but in my integrity, I felt, no, we had negotiated that. We need to stick with it. And I was literally willing to say, look, if you need a signature for this, you could put someone else in this job. I'm not going to do it. And if it costs me my job, then so be it. God's my provider. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about where it mattered that much to me. And so it's like, I'll find a new career. Okay,
Right.
fine. I'll go do something else and honor God in what I'm doing. And that's where, that's kind of the point is it's not just pastors. We sort of outsource this to have we outsource morality to the politicians and all this stuff that's like, a lot of them don't even really want the pro-life issue solved because then they don't have anything to fundraise on.
Right.
That's a high fundraising issue. Same thing with guns. Same thing with Bibles and free speech and all this. Like if it was actually it's just there's a game there, and it's infuriating. So,
well, the thing that Christians I think need to be. I think it's sad because I think we've been regulated down to a subculture in society. And we've kind of allowed ourselves to do that, but at the same, but the thing is that the reason why humanity has progressed is because of the kingdom principles, the principles of the kingdom of God, and we also have, unfortunately, we were talking about parables a little bit earlier, and you look at parables, it's like, there's individual application for them, but the parables, most of the parables are about the kingdom of God, and when you stop and you start breaking those down, several of them are about the kingdom of God growing, and the kingdom of God starting small and ever expanding, and somehow we read those things these days. And we see, we're living in a post-Christian world. We're contracting, all of this stuff. And it's like, no. I don't care what we're seeing. Again, going back to like, we live by, not by sight, but we live by faith, right? So, it's like, if we're seeing that means that the enemy is trying to do something. We need to stand against it. And we need to say, no, we're not going to just accept that. No, the world, it says several times in the Bible, my glory will expand across the face of the earth. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. Like that is going to happen. That is an inevitability. The kingdom, the kingdom comes down as a boulder. It strikes the feet, of the statue. And that statue was literally the epitome of empire and tyranny, and the kingdom comes down and strikes it, and then becomes a mountain that spreads over the entire earth. You know what I mean? Like there's the mustard seed, the leaven, whatever. Right? There's a myriad of different examples that we can point to in the Bible that talk about the kingdom of God advancing across the planet, and so when Christians sit there and they go, oh, we're a subculture now, or we're it's regressing, or the enemy is getting so big. It's like, well, it's because you're letting it. We have to stand up and we have to say, no, I'm not gonna pussyfoot around my belief system, right? Yeah. Because the whole reason why humanity has advanced past Christ is because of the principles of the kingdom. The principles of the kingdom have filtered into society as leaven, and it's going to continue to expand, and it's going to continue to grow, and it's not going to stop. It just can't. It won't, because God said it won't. And so if we believe that, then it doesn't matter what the WEF says. It doesn't matter what China's trying to do. It doesn't matter what Russia's trying to do. It doesn't matter what the deep state Hillary Clinton, Obama people are trying to do. It doesn't matter. Right. It doesn't matter, because my God has infinite possibilities up of his sleeve. Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, it's like, look at Esther. I mean, that situation was pretty dire.
Yeah. Absolutely. And all of a sudden flipped it on its head.
In one night, bam.
That's it. But she was willing to take a risk and use her sphere of influence. And here we are back there. And it's like you said, we're in this kind of subculture thing. It's like, go off into your little area and just hang over there and do your little prayer stuff and worship stuff. But it's like, that's not what this is. You mean everything you're just talking about, this leaven, that's influencing society. That's influencing all these different spheres of influence in society. And we have each one of us has a sphere of influence, and we should be using that. And that's what I'm with this podcast. And everything I'm doing is trying to remove the bifurcation, remove the separation of faith and spiritual from everything else in our life, because there is no separation there. We've sort of bought into that, and everything is relevant to our faith, and it informs everything. And we need to be equipped and discipled and trained in that. And God is using everything to shape and disciple us. And we really need to be not just on the defense so much. We're always on our heels trying to have less ground taken instead of getting ready to throw a punch, metaphorically speaking, and it's just, we need to be on offense and just calling it out and saying what it is. I mean, look at these people who don't allow themselves to be canceled, and they don't apologize for something they shouldn't apologize for. And they actually just say what it is. Look at how wildly popular. I gave one example of the hockey player, these other coaches, all that kind of stuff. And then you see what happened recently with the guy that had the heart attack, and everybody praying with NFL live prayer on ESPN. Like, who would have ever thought about that? And like you said, God's got infinite possibilities up his sleeve, but we need to take our position and stop scurrying away like we need to apologize for having a belief in truth and living as though it's true and that sort of thing.
How many times do you hear people praying for breakthrough?
Right.
It's hard to be. It's hard to obtain breakthrough on defense. It's like nearly impossible.
Yeah, what are you breaking through?
You're not breaking through anything. You're trying to keep from being broken through.
Exactly. Yeah, that's like the defensive line. No, that doesn't make any sense.
So if you're praying for breakthrough and you're not on offense, then it's a lost cause. Your prayer is not going to get answered.
Yeah. And I think us just being willing to act on what God has already told us to do. And I will say this: a lot of times we're trying to get direction, specifically what God, in this specific case, what he wants us to do. I call it situational revelation, like just what for this right now, God, this circumstance, what am I to do? Or word of knowledge, whatever you want to call it. But many people don't even do the basic things that are already explicit in his word. Right. Like if someone's sleeping around or someone's doing all this, not, being shady in their work and all this kind of stuff, it's like, maybe fix the things that you already explicitly in God's word and operate that way. And then God can give some more clear directions.
Right. Yeah. No, take the log out of your own eye kind of thing, Yeah,
exactly. Well, I think, is there anything else you wanted to say about I know I like when we talk about the Christian belief system, how, just the idea of even logic. I mean, logic itself and reasoning and evidence, and these are all, there has to be, God has to exist for us to even use these things. Otherwise, it's just random. And so you actually have to use God's worldview to argue against God existing, to even make a logical argument. And so then you have all these other things. But it's a lost art, and that's like I was saying, if people want to get, connected with how to engage in culture. I mean, obviously you can, check out our Rumble channel, but this book, Saving Leonardo, I think is really, really good. It's a really great book, just to kind of, because it's about how the world is intentionally trying to co-opt Christianity, because, they have to co-opt it because the devil isn't creative and the devil is chaos. And so if you're going to have any kind of ordered society, you have to co-opt certain parts of the Christian belief systems and the underpinnings of these kingdom principles that we've been talking about. And then you have to kind of ignore certain parts and things like that and try to make something work. And that's why you can still have somebody live a worldly life, but there's certain aspects of principles that come from the underpinnings of these kingdom principles that they're adhering to, that it works. It's it's operating, right? Well, it's like they don't realize that they're following the instruction manual a little bit. Yeah, exactly. That's why. And then you see people who are secular people having lots of success in these different areas. But like you said, there are biblical principles that are being used by people who don't know God.
I mean, like, let's just take, for example, a monogamous homosexual relationship. Monogamy is a Christian concept, right? While now they might be They might be, indulge there. I mean, they're obviously, sinning when it comes to the homosexual part, but they're at least saying like, well, I'm going to be faithful to this person. Well, that principle, the monogamy principle, still works regardless of whether or not they're engaging in the homosexual stuff. Right. So that's what I'm saying. It's like there's a co-opting of sorts, because a homosexual relationship, chaos, right? If I'm just going to be like, well, I can just be sexually promiscuous with anything and everything. Well, then that's chaotic, right? That will result in just absolute pandemonium, right? You can't construct any kind of civil society on anything that exists or lives like that, right? But that's the devil. The devil is chaos. Well, so what I'm saying is, it's like even those that would engage in a little bit of chaos still have to co-opt a certain amount of order to make life and society function.
Yeah, I mean, just even going and ordering a coffee or going and doing whatever it is, even if it's not a moral thing.
Ordering a coffee. Yeah, when I order a latte, right, they're not going to give me, a bale of hay. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, it's
right.
Let's be reasonable. Yeah. And I guess since you're recommending a book, I will also recommend, and I'll put all this in the show notes, but this is called Apologetics for a New Generation. And it basically talks about how we can use relationships and what's going on in culture to actually bring a conversation to God. Right. And we want to leave people wanting another conversation about that when we come back to it, and doing it in that sort of way where it's building the relationship. But I think that, us being willing, we need to come to a point where I had a point when I first became a supervisor in a production facility where I had to get over the fact that not everybody in this factory is going to like me, and not everybody is going to like the way I do things. And once I got over that, I was able to operate a lot more effectively as a leader. And it's the same thing with our Christian beliefs. We learn how to walk these things out, but if we're not ever willing to take a stand or have somebody dislike us or have somebody misunderstand what we said, then it's going to be tough for us to really advance the kingdom and do what God has called us to do if we're not ever willing to take that risk and put ourselves out there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And like I mean, the point that I was trying to make earlier was just that the things that work in society are from the Christian faith.
Right. Yep.
The elements that work in society are from the elements that bring order, because that was the charge in the garden. The charge in the garden was have dominion, subdue the earth. And when God, floated over the surface of the waters, it was formless and void. It was chaos. Yeah. And he brought order with his speech and light. And so through our words, through our light, we are also supposed to be in the image of God, bringing order to chaos. And when we make excuses for chaos, we're actually not a part of the solution. You can't, it's like going back to the whole, whether you're working or whether it's a church or whatever, it's like you were saying as a supervisor, right? It's like, well, as a supervisor, I'm going to live by my moral beliefs. I'm going to live by my integrity, and I'm not going to I'm not going to play favorites. Right. Because God says, like, I'm no respecter of persons. Like, even God doesn't play favorites and stuff like that. Means there has to be a level playing field for operations to succeed. Mm-hmm. Right. Because when you start playing favorites, well, that's corrupt. Right. That's where chaos can kind of come in. And so when all of a sudden you're like, you got, some guy that comes in and it's like, well, hey, I'm going to slip you some Cubans, and so like, hey, can you give me that promotion? Right. Well, now all of a sudden, now that's underplay. It's chaos. You can't have a level playing field. You can't have order. And so even so that, like, as, a business person, you have to, understand that order comes from the Christian belief system, regardless of whether or not you're a Christian or not. It comes from, this is kingdom principles. These are universal principles. And when we say Christian belief system, when we say biblical morality, it's like, I believe that God, wrote all this stuff on people's hearts, right? And that's why we have consciences. That's why people, when they violate their conscience, well, they have to have a conscience to violate. And so therefore, when they violate and they harden their hearts, well, they had a heart to begin with. So it's like God gives us the tools, but we have to be the ones that are, through our choices, through our whatever, we end up, our compromises and everything else, we end up becoming hardened. We become dark. We become filthy, and everybody's fallen short of the glory of God, right? And so, but that glory, that standard is there, and that he never lowers his standard. He never lowers his standard at all. And so, but what I'm saying is, it's like the people that we have to understand is that as Christians, like, our job is to bring order to this chaos. And it's sad for me when I see Christians making excuses for this chaos to exist, or to co-opt this chaos, or to like allow this chaos to be, when actually there, you can go back through all the way to the birth of Christ, and you can look onward, and you can see the advance of the individual. You can see the advance of, moral society, and these underpinnings, and, like the Magna Carta, and tyranny being finally suppressed by the Constitution, and, self-government, and all this stuff, right? All that stuff came from Jesus. Like, it came from the seed. And, and that's what's funny. It's like, well, how could that come from Jesus? It doesn't look like anything like Jesus. Well, the mustard tree doesn't look anything like the seed. It's like, right? It's like, it looks completely different, but it came from the seed.
Yeah. The fruit doesn't look like the tree either.
Well, no. And so Christians just need to stop apologizing for their faith, and really start, like I've told people, like with atheists, it's like, I'm not going to apologize for the fact that my belief system, gives you permission to doubt God, like, that's fine. But you have to admit that Christianity and the power of the individual and self-government and all this other stuff that came as fruits of that, allow you to be who you are. And so I'm not going to apologize for that.
Yeah. And I think there's not going to be a debate or anything when we're standing before God. Everybody's going to have their eyes wide open. And if we want them open now, we can have them open. There's, we'll know the truth. And that's what sets us free. I mean, and when we start to live this way, and actually people open themselves up to understanding that God is real, he can reveal himself very quickly, but a lot of people don't want to see it. So
anyway.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to share as we wrap up? And again, tell people where they can find you.
No, that's been awesome. We should do it again. Fun conversations. You can go to SperoRumble.com, SPER Rumble.com. And that's where you can find our Rumble channel. But then also we are on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Google Podcasts. You can find us there. It's the Spero Pictures podcast. So it's SPERO Pictures podcast. Me and my wife, we do a variety of different things. So we'll talk about, movies and culture and what we're doing there. We'll talk about financial stuff because, we run a business. And so we have a financial advisor that we talk to all the time about what's going on financially. My wife and I will also do some social commentary. Usually it kind of comes from the standpoint of, like what's going on in the world, the headlines that are going on in the world, but then like kind of like what's the stories, like you were saying, like kind of what the stories are behind that, and how long, because that's one of my passions is history. And so like, I think that, one of the ways that we get controlled is by having us forget our history. Mm-hmm. And we kind of become living in this ever constant present. You see that nowadays a lot where people just get into this news cycle where they can't even remember what happened 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And so you live outside of context. And when you live outside of context, you're just wandering around in the wilderness, for 40 years. You don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going. You don't know where you come from. And so we try to, we have those kind of conversations about like, well, don't forget, like this happened back then. And, like this is why it's relevant today or why this is, relevant in context of that and all that sort of stuff. So, and then keep an eye out for our stuff coming out. We're going to have a lot of stuff coming out in the next couple of years, some big projects, and we'll be able to talk about them more on our next session.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thanks for joining. I think we got a lot more to talk about, and I think we'll definitely be having you back. We got a lot of rabbit holes we can go down with a lot of this stuff. And so, but thanks for being on the show again.
Yeah, man. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. And to our listeners, thank you for joining. Matt gave you where you can find out more about him, and make sure you go to ryanshoward.com to get previous episodes. And you can listen to my first episode with Matt as well. And be sure to get in touch with us if you want to hear about something on the show or if you have any questions. Again, that's ryanshoward.com. Thank you so much for joining. God bless. And we'll see you in the next episode.
If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, and you can help spread the word by leaving a 5-star review and sharing it with your friends. Visit ryanshoward.com to learn more about living the intentional, influential, and impactful life you were created for.